Warning, this episode is going full speed ahead into spoiler territory for the Magnus archives. I'm talking about spoiling basically everything in the show here, so if you have any intention of listening to it, which you should if you haven't already, bookmark this page and book it out of here so you can enjoy the series in its true glory. Also, this episode is going to feature in-depth discussions of fear, in particular as they relate to isolation, depression, fog, and the sea. As a result, viewer discretion is advised. Oh, and a massive thank you to the Magnus Archives wiki, which was very useful in getting the info for this video together. Welcome back everyone to the place where all my free time goes to die. This is part 3 of a 15-part series where I take the time to explore each of the entities featured in the excellent horror anthology podcast The Magnus Archives. If you want to watch the other episodes in this series first, which I recommend since I'll probably reference back to them a fair amount, there should be a link to the full playlist in the iCard at the top right of your screen. TMA has a great plot, and amazing world building, so I felt it was about time that someone looked into it a little deeper. Hey y'all, I'm Afton Geek here, and this is Afton Talks, where today, I'm going to explain The Lonely from the Magnus Archives. But, before we do, y'all know the drill, I'm a small YouTuber, and these videos take a lot of time and effort to produce, so if you want to be a part of a very exclusive club that only 6% of my viewers have joined, consider clicking the subscribe button down below. It's totally free, only takes a second, and if you decide you don't want to be subscribed anymore, it's easily reversible. Also, if you want to make sure you see the next part of this series when it comes out, click on the bell icon and select all uploads to be notified when I upload. Alright, that's enough shilling for one video. Let's disappear into The Lonely. The Lonely, also known as Forsaken or the One Alone, is pretty clearly, I think, the fear of being alone. Born of isolation, the Lonely builds fear by cutting people off from their loved ones, society, and safety. As a result, the Lonely has a tendency to target those who are already predisposed to being alone and do not have obvious support structures, such as those who travel often or shut-ins, or those who have been trapped aboard a small room in a space station. As a result, the Lonely has a tendency to manifest in forms that put emphasis on how alone the victims truly are, such as large and empty spaces, silence, crowds of faceless people, monotonous suburbia, and fog. It also seems that the Lonely has a focus on the sea and even lighthouses, though it seems unclear how much of this is from the Lonely and how much is from the most notable Lonely avatar we know of, Peter Lucas. Speaking of him, actually, that segues pretty cleanly into the characters associated with the Lonely. Obviously, there's the Lucas family, who have apparently been worshipping the Lonely for generations. It seems that these deeply religious practices likely originate from Mordecai Lucas, who was an associate of Jonah Magnus and likely Robert Smirk. Over time, the family would gradually expand, bringing in few new people and several children, not all of whom would choose to follow the Lonely. For example, Aaron and Judith Lucas, who were Peter Lucas's siblings, were sent to live with distant relatives after not having the temperament for the family faith, and Evan Lucas, who was Naomi Hearn's fiancé, was estranged from the family all the way up until his death. The rest of the family have seemingly done great things for the Lonely, though, with Conrad helping orchestrate the events on the Daedalus, and Nathaniel forming Solus Shipping plc and funding the Stratosphere Group's Daedalus work. However, of all the Lucases, Peter is probably the most important for our purposes today. Peter Lucas spent many years as the captain of one of Solus Shipping's finest vessels, the Tundra, and even attempted a ritual called the Silence, but his role in the story really comes into effect when he takes over as head of the Magnus Institute from Elias following his arrest. The two men quickly established a wager, something that Peter was reportedly shown to be quite fond of, involving the fate of the Magnus Institute and an employee's devotion. Choosing Martin Blackwood as the center of this bet, Peter would spend most of the 4th season bringing Martin closer to the Lonely under the promise of defeating the developing extinction. Unfortunately for Peter, his plans did not go to plan, all culminating in his death in the Lonely at the hands of an angry archivist. Peter's main ability is his access to the Lonely, which seems to be a parallel space that acts as a physical manifestation of the entity in the same way that the coffin leads to the truest form of forever deep below creation, or the space that vast avatars seem to be able to banish people into. Peter uses this space as a dumping ground for people who disappoint, anger, or otherwise have the misfortune of crossing him. But it also seems that he can disappear into this space at will, using it to move quickly, silently, and invisibly, although it's a little unclear if that's exactly what's going on. Finally, there's Martin Blackwood, who is an archival assistant and the Antichrist +1 post-change. Martin is an interesting character. I found him kind of annoying on my first listen through, but I'll be honest, he's really grown on me. The one hill I will die on, Martin is short. He's like a 4'5" little gremlin, and no one can change my thoughts on the matter. Also, the fandom really went with J-Mart, which sounds like some garbage local grocery store, over Markivist or Simswood. Thanks for the suggestion, Abel. Alright, Martin rant over. If you want actual information on Martin, you didn't listen to the podcast, did you? The Lonely is fittingly sparse by way of artifacts, but it does have a couple. On the lighter side of things, there's a disappearance, which, unlike most of his vast library, is actually just a pamphlet. Don't be fooled by its short length, though. It'll take quite a while to read, given that you'll instantly be vanished into the Lonely if you read it through to completion. There's also the Boatswain's Call, which is a pipe wielded by Tarotesque Dahl, first mate to Peter Lucas on board the Tundra. This call seems to be able to summon the Lonely in almost an inversion of Lucas's own abilities. It brings part of the Lonely into the world, rather than bringing things from the world into the Lonely. The final Lonely artifact is a painting sold by Mikhail Salesa, which was an English pastoral that apparently had the ability to draw people into the Lonely, because there's only so much you can do with people being alone, I guess. There are only a few locations associated with the Lonely, and as you may have guessed, they're all connected to the Lucas family. Obviously, their property has strong elements of the Lonely, as is seen both within their familial house at Moorland House and the graveyard located nearby. Beyond the home, there's also Peter Lucas's beloved ship, the Tundra. No doubt a mobile stronghold for the Lonely, this ship has a tendency to make people and things disappear. Also, it's moving empty cargo, so that's something. Finally, there's the Daedalus, which was made in conjunction with the Vast and the Dark, along with significant contributions from the Lucas family, of course. So, again, from what we know about rituals, it can be presumed that at least 2 rituals of the Lonely have been formulated. This can be determined from the fact that Peter Lucas claims to have designed his Lonely ritual on his own, going so far as to give it a terrible name, which implies that it is distinct from the ritual formulated by Robert Smirk. Since we know nothing about Smirk's ritual, let's talk about Peter's failed ritual, the Silence. Using the immense fortune of the Lucas family, Peter created a massive apartment complex designed specifically to make its inhabitants feel as isolated as possible. To double down on this idea, he then sought out people already predisposed to loneliness with which to fill his tower. At the culmination of the Silence, Peter would activate remote locks on all of the doors, leaving the inhabitants to slowly die entirely cut off from humanity. Unfortunately for him, Gertrude Robinson, ritual disruptor extraordinaire, caught wind of his plot, which she foiled using the funniest means possible, the press. Specifically, Gertrude filed an anonymous tip to The Guardian regarding the terrible isolation of the apartment, bringing so much community outreach and attention that Peter Lucas apparently just gave up. I guess you really can get anyone to crumble with enough reporters. The Lonely actually has a good variety of post-change domains, so let's cut to the chase. First up is the creatively named House, which is a huge, sparsely decorated house filled with smog that causes those inside to forget their pasts, emphasizing tragic memories while fading positive ones. It seems that this domain focuses especially on those afraid of being forgotten, or, conversely, forgetting those you love, so obviously it was perfect for one Martin Carton Blackwood. Speaking of Martin, the next domain is the equally creatively named Martin's domain. You could make an argument that the prison has shades of the lonely, but that doesn't flow together as well in a script, does it? This domain is an empty moor, with a small handful of individuals left alone in the rain. Their torture is built almost entirely on not being important enough to remember, which is just as fitting for our sad little assistant. There's also the suburbs, which, aside from being obviously built on the fear of a suburban hellscape, may also draw from the fear generated by hidden abuse, as indicated by a few lines surrounding it. However, as we never see anything of it properly, that's all just speculation for now. Alright, let's talk about the connections between the Lonely and the other entities. As mentioned in our Eye video, the Lonely and the Eye seem to be quite friendly. Obviously, as John notes, much of the fear brought about by the Lonely is from the knowledge of how truly alone you are, but there's also the Institute's funding from the Lucas family and the friendship between Peter Lucas and Jonah Magnus. It also seems that the Dark and the Vast get quite chummy with the Lonely, as they combine forces to create the Daedalus. Individually, the Vast's Fairchild family is not unlike the Lucases in a number of ways, which certainly boosts the mutual beneficial relationship between the Lonely and the Vast, while the Dark, much like the Desolation, has strong religious ties, something that the Lucases seem to be quite similar to. There's the Web, which the Lonely is connected to both in the Master Plan, but also in the fact that Martin Blackwood, one of the most notable Lonely avatars in the series, was originally meant to be filled with spiders, according to Annabelle Kane. Oh, and there's the Buried, which shares a lot of thematic elements with the Lonely. Everybody good? Awesome. Alright, let's talk analysis. The Lonely, from a thematic standpoint, is actually one of the easiest to understand entities, I would argue. Of course, perhaps the most easy connection to make is to use the Lonely as a metaphor for depression. The feeling of isolation, paired with the emotional numbness that most avatars of the Lonely feel, definitely appears reminiscent of what depression can feel like. While this point has been talked to death, or about as much as a point can be in the Magnus Archives community, I think it's important to bring up because of the ways it changes how you see the Lonely and all of Season 4. Speaking of Season 4, am I the only one who feels like the Lonely came out of nowhere? Like, yes, obviously it's meant to be a representation of Elias's departure from the Institute and Peter's securing of power, but it really kind of hits the story head on. On the one hand, this arguably makes it more like depression, coming out of left field, especially in the wake of panic or losses as seen at the end of Season 3. However, on the other, it really makes it feel unsatisfying from an audience standpoint, especially given how much web iconography was used for Martin up until that point. Also, Peter Lucas deserved better. Anyways, moving on, the Lonely was much harder to connect to my current running metaphor of the entities representing storytelling. So here's the two best options I came up with, neither of which I like as much as the Eye and the Web's connections. First, you could argue that the Lonely represents the story's isolation from the audience. It's the physical manifestation of the fourth wall, keeping the story in its own unique world separate from the audience. That doubles, though. It's also a constant reminder that the audience, no matter how invested they may be in the story, isn't actually a part of it. You're an observer, the Eye, watching and listening to the events of the story, but never really managing to be a part of it. Alternatively, you could see the Lonely as a representation for the Darkest Hour. Season 4 is arguably the closest we get to a Darkest Hour in TMA, save for John and Martin's stay in a particular cabin, as so much of it is recovery from the tragedy of the unknowing, the archival staff reduced to a poorly organized group of fools, the Institute in shambles, Martin separated, John turning into something not quite human, daisy stuck in forever deep below creation, and the looming threat of the extinction that only the audience and a handful of characters actually know about. The biggest issue with this interpretation, of course, is that comparing something that's representative of depression to a literary darkest hour is, well, it's not always a great idea. However, this is also the beginning of the entities I argue are representative of their given seasons, with the Lonely being the symbol of Season 4's overbearing threats and unclear future. Well, there you have it. The Lonely. What did you think? Did I miss anything? Feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all right back here next time for a discussion on I Do Not Know You. I've been Afton Geek here, and this has been Entities Explained. Good night, YouTube people.